Hello and welcome to the Basketball Addicts podcast, where we answer the age-old question, the question that everybody wants to know is, how can you hate from outside the finals? You can't even get in. How can you hate from outside the finals when you can't even get in? Now today, I know things look a little different. I'm here alone. Yeah, wondering, where's Jason? Well, his internet's in some shit right now, so we had to record separately. So we're going to come out and release these videos probably sometime this week. This is the week before Valentine's Day, so it should be coming out. Recording this on Wednesday, so it should be coming out fully edited Thursday at 12 p.m. as normal, as well as his clips as well. So let's talk about how can you hate from outside the finals when you can't even get in. And that's the main purpose of this episode today. Today, this is episode 3 of, I think, a 7-part series in which we will be discussing the greatest upsets in playoff history. So we already went through the Atlanta Hawks and the 76ers of last year and the 2020 Miami Heat and the Milwaukee Bucks, in which I think the Miami Heat beat them 4-1. I think they were a 5th seed and Milwaukee was a 1 seed that year. So today we're going to travel back in time 2 years as well and talk about our third matchup, which is the 2020 Denver Nuggets versus the LA Clippers. LA was a 2nd seed, Denver was a 3 seed. So this matchup, the LA Clippers was a team that had superior talent. They had a recent 6th Man of the Year winner, which was Montrezl Harrell. They also had Lou Will. The pick and roll was dynamite. They had offensive pieces like Patrick Beverley and wing depth and an okay center. Now they added Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. This team was hyper talented. I mean, super talented. Everybody had touted them as the next championship team to win it all. They were supposedly better than the Lakers, even though the Lakers took the chip home that year, and they, we'll get into that. So the Denver Nuggets so now I was talking about the Denver Nuggets. The Denver Nuggets had guys like Nikola Jokic, which recent MVP winner, Gary Harris, Jamal Murray was playing out of his mind. Tony Craig, Monte Morris, Paul Millsap was still good. They had Michael Porter Jr., who was still coming into his own. And, these are the big players on those teams, but Will Barton wasn't playing. So the reason why you could have seen this upset coming was, first things first, was like the Clippers, even though they had superior talent compared to the Nuggets, they were not utilizing their talent to the fullest extent of their ability. The best way possible, and have flaws like the head coach that the head coach wasn't seeing. So, flaws that the head coach wasn't seeing at the time. So, they had to overcome, and basically it's the one flaw that we always talk about on this podcast. And if you listen to us before, you know what I'm about to get at. Basically, you have Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, and they score from virtually the same spots on the floor. Kawhi is a mid-range killer, can sometimes knock down the 3. Paul George is a mid-range killer, can knock down the 3 as well. So they're very similar players, and so. And they both have the ability to, drive to the basket. So that's another thing. They have 3 of the same things. They're identical players. They both play really great defense as well. So they both are mainly wing scorers, is what I'm getting at. So it's very hard to find and figure out a way to put those 2 on the court at the same time. And they had other decent 3-point shooters on the team, but those 2 created a great defensive duo, as I was getting into. They're both very great defensive-minded, defensive-capable people. Players on the court. And the team had a defensive identity as well. You had Patrick Beverley, who was like this, I don't know a pit bull. And then you had Montrezl Harrell, who was, dominating defensively and offensively as well. And that should have been realized and adequately adjusted for, because they basically used that 6-man rotation of Lou Will with Montrezl Harrell off the bench and wanted to run the bench, until I mean, the bench unit through those two by doing that, they forced Paul George and Kawhi Leonard to play even more minutes together, which they should have been playing separate minutes. It should have been Kawhi Leonard, and then, when Kawhi Leonard sat down, even though, but you want Paul George to start, you want Kawhi Leonard to start, you want them both on the court because they're both all-star talent, but sometimes you have to make those adjustments so that your team can succeed. We all see this, we've seen this last year, we've seen these previous years, is when Paul George is without Kawhi Leonard, he performs better. When Kawhi Leonard is without Paul George, he performs better because it opens up the floor because you don't have to worry about, okay, I have my spots, he has my spots. We're both going to attack from the same spots, so then it doesn't work. So basically, so what they should have been doing, what the Clippers should have done, is playing it like the Rockets used to do when they had Chris Paul and James Harden. They should have had 1 minute in the game where Paul or George or Kawhi Leonard is not on the floor. Rotationally speaking, that should have been priority more so than just having Montrezl Harrell and Lou Williams play together. They were so, much about, okay, we have to have Lou Will and Montrezl Harrell on the floor at the exact same time. This has to happen. This is our bread and butter. This is what we need. And those two should have been starters, So Montrezl Harrell and Lou Will should have been starters. Lou Will should not have been 6-man. Montrezl Harrell should not have been 6-man. It's better to throw out your best pieces early. I don't know what the thing is, especially Lou Will. When he's such a dynamite scorer, you definitely need him. You should why wait until the second half to get those 20-30 points in when you can have him start, and then why you gotta have him? Why you gotta bring him off the bench? He's had this this 6-man syndrome follow him for his entire career. He's always going to come off the bench now. He'll never be a starter. He's not viewed as a starter, even though he could be your leading scorer off the bench. So, like I said, you need to have Montrezl Harrell and Lou Will start. They need to, and you need to put out the best lineup to win an NBA championship, and those to give things that allows Kawhi Leonard and Paul George to load offensively to be taken off, for the load offensively to be taken off, and the pressure to be taken off of those two, which created a great dynamic, and it should have been 40 minutes of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard and those guys leading the bench units, more so than focusing on just having Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell do that, because Patrick Beverley is a good defender, but he's not a good passer. And he's not a good scorer. He can just hit standstill 3-point shots, and that forced Kawhi Leonard and Paul George to be decision makers. We talked about this before in a recent podcast, where the reason when before Clippers traded Rondo out and switched him out, he went back to upstairs in Staples Center, not the basement in Staples Center, as the media likes to say. Before he got traded back to the Lakers, was that Rondo creates a dynamic with this team that was not recently there, is that you force Kawhi Leonard and Paul George to be decision makers, and they're not great thinkers. They're not the great minds of basketball. These are more of your great scorers, great defenders. These are those guys who you put the ball in the hand, they can score for you, but they don't see the floor like a LeBron James. They don't see the floor like a Chris Paul. They don't see the floor like a Jason Kidd. They don't see that. They see their opportunity to score. So without Rondo, you put the decision, you make Kawhi play chess when he's not used to playing chess. You make Paul George play chess when he's not used to playing chess. So then you create a dynamic in which you have your best players on the floor, but they can't be utilized to the fullest extent of their ability, because now they have to, I have to score for myself, and I have to think about how I can set it up so that other people can score, because they're shot creators. They don't need they just need the ball in their hands, and they're going to drop, 40, 30, 40, however many points it's going to be. They don't really need anything else. They can get their own bucket, but there's people on that team like Patrick Beverley and Montrezl Harrell who don't do that. Lou Will's a shot creator. He can get his own bucket, but there's other people on that team who don't do that, who need somebody to go, okay, we're going to run the set, get you involved. You want to hit that side corner three. I know exactly where you're going to be at. Oh, back cut. I see you there. They're not seeing the floor in that perspective, because they've always just been wing scores. So when you get a swing scorer that doesn't have a basketball mind, then you force them to be a decision maker, you have a problem. Now you have them playing outside of what they're normally used to, so now they're not as effective as they should be. Yeah, we're still going to get the 40-point explosions from Kawhi. Yeah, we're still going to get the 40-point explosions from Paul George, but it doesn't really equate to a winning culture because now you have, like I said, they're playing chess when they're not used to playing chess. Sometimes high scoring does not necessarily equate to wins. Just because you can drop 40 don't mean that you're going to win a championship. Basketball is mental as well as it is a scoring game. It comes down to the greatest decision makers in the time. Like LeBron is a great decision maker. Chris Paul is a great decision maker. Jason Kidd is a great decision maker. Magic was a great decision maker. It's the decision makers. So back to this. I went off on a tangent a little bit. So but as I was saying, like I said, Patrick Beverley is not a good passer. He's not a good scorer. He just can hit standstill threes. And the big thing is that it just forced Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, just to reiterate, to be decision makers. They're not decision makers. But because it's not natural for them, for their game. Now getting to Zubac. So Zubac was not a starting level center and got exposed by Nikola Jokic during this series. Nikola Jokic, and Jamal Murray. So if you're already getting exposed to the center position, why not have Montrezl Harrell, who, yes, is shorter, but is punishing the other team on the offensive end, so is leveling out his defensive weakness. And he overcomes that with phenomenal energy. And it is very apparent that was not being done because everybody remembers how off Paul George was. But the reason why Paul George never got into a rhythm was because he was always forced to be with Kawhi Leonard. And he was always forced to be the off-ball guy running off the ball screens, not fully utilizing his talent, forcing him to be a very small percentage, forcing them to be Kawhi Leonard and Paul George to be a very small percentage of themselves. Forcing Paul George to be a very small percentage of himself when Kawhi Leonard is on the floor. And he's the type of player that needs to get shots up. He's a volume scorer. And volume scorers need shots. So, just like Lou Will. Lou Will needs shots too. And so is Kawhi Leonard. He needs shots as well. So you need to give them the most minutes possible. So when that is the end of the game and you need any one of them to shoot a corner 3-point shot, they can make it because they're in rhythm. But they never allowed them to build rhythm throughout the game because Doc Rivers is a very bad coach. Let's face facts. He's not a good coach. He's been given superstars who's had high talent and succeeded. He's not a good coach. And he was not able to utilize their strengths and didn't see the obvious glaring weakness that he had to overcome, which is why he got fired, because you had Morris to rotate in with those forwards, and you had a lot of depth at that position. And the Denver Nuggets had a legitimate shot creators, which led to great advantage because they all worked well together. Because they had Gary Harris, Jamal Murray, who are not great passers, but they gel really well with Nikola Jokic, which is one of the best passing bigs in the league right now. And they had Paul Millsap, who was still a good player at that point in time. He's regressed since, but at that point he was still good. And this team had more consistent shot creators that were used more efficiently than Doc Rivers, not using his players correctly to lead a team like the Denver Nuggets. Having the ability to be a much more talented team when Michael Porter Jr. was also being a very effective bench role player, and their weakness was the center position. They didn't have any great center defenders or paint protectors. Jamal Murray would finish around the rim all the time, and they couldn't stop Jokic. This team was built for wing depth and defense, but they faced a team whose offensive specialty is attacking the basket and perimeter scoring from the guard position. So what the Clippers were built to stop, so what the Clippers were built to stop the Nuggets were not, and that is why that matchup was a really bad matchup for the Clippers. And if the Clippers weren't built to stop the Nuggets. And that's why the matchup was a really bad matchup for the Clippers. And if their offense was being used the right way at 100%, they would have still beat the Denver Nuggets, but they were not operating and playing the kind of game that they could have been because they did not understand how to use those players for 48 minutes. They even they still can't figure out it's like rocket science for them. They can't figure it out. But the Nuggets were just built in a way that was really hard for the Clippers to stop. They were built to stop a team they weren't built to stop a team like Nuggets. They weren't built to stop LeBron or guard Stephen Curry and have people that can rotate and switch. They weren't built to stop the Nuggets. They were built to stop a team like the Nuggets, like to stop LeBron or guard Stephen Curry and have people that can rotate and switch. But the Denver Nuggets was a team that had great point guard finisher at the rim in Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. So they were great at the things that the Clippers lacked at defending, which led to the upset that happened. And that was one of the greatest upsets because, I'm a big Nuggets fan. If you listen to this podcast, I'm big on the Nuggets. Not right now. They're doing a lot of stupid stuff over there in Denver. But I'm still a big fan of the Nuggets, especially during this series, because I remember the year before, I think it was me and Jason, because we're good friends from college. It's a quick tangent real quick as I close up my argument here. I think we watched Jamal Murray Jamal Murray and the Nuggets, and Nikola Jokic, of course, get spanked by Portland. And then for them to come back the following year and spank Portland, the Clippers, I was happy. I was on top of the world. I'm a Lakers fan because of LeBron, but I was still happy. I was like, cool. I'm like, okay. Because I really like the Nuggets. I'm really big on them. I understand. I like how they're built. I like the young. I like Jamal Murray. I like Nikola Jokic. I like Michael Porter Jr. I'm still big on Michael Porter Jr. I don't know what's going to happen with him. He might end up getting traded away like Bol. But I just like the way they're built. I've been big on the Nuggets for a long time. So I've been big on the Grizzlies. So I just like those young teams, those young running teams, those teams that set up and have skill and just a good point guard. That's my kind of team. So that wraps up for today. That is part 3 of the greatest upsets in NBA history. This is titled the greatest upsets in NBA history, part 3, Denver Nuggets versus the LA Clippers. Look out for that tomorrow on February 10th. It should be coming out at 12 p.m. Thank you all for listening. I'm Chris Muhammad, and we are the Basketball Addicts. Peace.